And welcome everybody. We're recording. It's 5 o'clock Monday, week 8. So this is the last live webinar. And we'll use this just as a general forum for any questions, issues, topics that anybody has. And then also, I've been hoping to get a specific webinar for the MW and MW people who are interested in the program, so we're just going to do it now. And I think a lot of you will find it valuable. Dennis and I had a long conversation a couple of days ago about the examination and what's really required for the examination, for kind of some background about the organization. But we'll just sort of free-form it, and then I'm going to go climb on an Amtrak train in Chemult, Oregon tonight and head down to Davis and pick up my son's car and go to the International Bulk Wine and Spirits Show in South San Francisco. So there you go. In general, about the course, about the program, any questions, comments, topics that weren't covered? All right, well, let's go then.
I have one comment.
Yes.
I'm a little tardy on all the homework, just full disclosure to everybody. So the other day, my wife and a couple of people that are, part of the team putting this winery together, we did the blending exercise.
Oh, right.
I've never done that before. I mean, I tasted the different clones and all that kind of thing, but never fiddled around with blending. We all made our own blend, proceeded to then have a blind judging. And I'm telling you, it wasn't like we had 20 bottles to choose from or anything. And it was insane how different the results were from just a little percentage change. It was really an eye-opening exercise for me. I would have never have guessed that mine would be so much worse than my wife's. No, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it brings out, what's your strategy? What's the process you're going to employ? And the thing that blows my mind is every time I've done this with a sort of a workshop, I do a full day kind of a workshop program, and we do wine biz sim stuff in the morning and go through the value chain and that. And then the afternoon, we form teams, and each team comes up with their own blend and whatever. Every single time the team that takes the cheapest material uses that as a base and then uses the other wines to kind of add to it, versus trying to take as much of the more expensive wine and not screw it up. Every single time that I've done it, the winning team has had, number one, the best bottom line, and number two, has won the blind tasting. And it's just really
completely opposite of any kind of rational thinking.
Yeah, exactly right. It is. And you're right, sometimes that tiny percent, but then the really befuddling thing is that you use private preserve or whatever, do something to keep the wines for the next day, and then keep some samples that you can put into small bottles so they don't have an air space that might keep a month. When you taste them the next day, they'll all be completely different. When you taste them in a month, they'll be different even still. And certainly by the time you get done and get them ready and get them shipped out and whatever. So
I almost took 60 cases of Pinot to the dump after it got bottled, because I was so upset with how it tasted. And fortunately, my wife said, "I think it'll be fine. Just put it in the, where we sell her the stuff." And about 8 months later, we're having dinner, and she served it with dinner and didn't tell me what it was. And she said, "What do you think?" I said, "This is great. Where'd you get it?"
The dump.
Yeah. Save 60 cases of wine.
Yeah, well, who watched Bottle Shock?
Yeah.
You
Got
know
it.
that.
That's real.
Yeah, that's real bottle shock. What they were saying in the movies, the BS bottle shock, that it all turned brown and did all this. It's like, God, how asinine can we be? All right. So what do we want to talk about, you guys? I'll let you guys drive.
Well, yeah, it's great that we could talk about the MW entrance exam. I guess one question I would have is, it seems like they pull questions from previous exams, and at what level of information do they expect you to recall to write a paper? I guess is what I've been trying to study for, but love your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've probably said it before. It bears repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating. Really carefully look at the question. Anybody have a couple of questions handy from the old exams, or that?
I do. Let me just go grab them out of my bag.
Because you'll hear it said, oh, people don't answer the question. They'll write a paper and it's not addressing the question or the topic. And we tend to think we're incapable of this, but Dennis and I had when we had our conversation day before yesterday, I think it was, we were talking about how you can take, do you remember the example we were using, Dennis? We were talking something about supply chain and.
You mean in regards to my project that we were talking about?
Yeah. And all the things that you're discovering about it.
Yeah, I realized quickly that I thought I had a great idea, but we talked about how from a niche market perspective that might work, but the idea was trying to get in with some of the airlines or cruise ships or those kind of things, and how certainly the tactics that larger companies use, and making 1 million plus cases with someone who's making 5,000 or 10,000 cases, they wouldn't really stand a chance to try to get into that sort of arena.
Right. So this is the compare and contrast. This is the understanding the multiple points of view, and not just knowing about wine. One of the problems is that WSET and wine classes focus on trivia, which is great. I love it. That's I've been doing that for 50 plus years now. But the Master of Wine examination is about showing mastery over a subject. So do you mind if I share a little bit about what we were talking about, Dennis?
Not at all, Tim. Because I mean, honestly, I'm glad you didn't sugarcoat anything, and you just put it out there. And I think that certainly sometimes wanting to get in the program as quickly as you can might not necessarily, I realize, be the best thing in the long run.
Correct. Yes. And the background on that is it's been a real challenge for the Institute as it's become an international organization, and as we work, people don't understand how hard the Institute works to set up the programs to help people pass this. But the challenge is that people are entering the program before they're ready, frankly. They'll have really no clue of what's expected or required of them, and they'll work really hard to the point we were talking about. We had a big problem primarily in Australia because we've been getting more and more Chinese candidates, and it's part of the Chinese culture to pay to have somebody write your school papers for you if you're wealthy enough. you can have a proxy even go take your examinations for you to get your degrees and certificates. So what was happening, the Institute was getting these really great, well done papers, well researched, well organized, but they were written by professional paper writers. And then the person would be granted ability to enter the study course, and it's like, who is this person, and how in the name of God did they get here? Because they just have no business being here. So with that in mind, Dennis was speculating about a project about making a business around a niche winery that focused on cruise lines and airlines and duty-free shops and military and that kind of stuff. So what I pointed out to him is that this is a completely separate end of the wine business, and there are specialty distributors usually based in primary port cities like Miami, LA, Seattle, etc. And they'll usually, and the bigger ones will have offices and warehousing in all these places. And frequently you're selling to these specialists duty free. So you're not paying the normal taxes and so forth. And then they've got their sales teams and they've got their logistics and whatever to service these ships all around the world and the airports and the duty free shops and whatever. The game is played only by the big producers. You really have to know what you're doing. You have to be able to service at a level to be able to provide enough quantity for these companies, and then against this also, maybe you're going for a little premium niche, the first class or business class, premium pours and whatever. And that end of the business, when I was at Beringer in the final days, so this was, 18 years ago, something like that. If you saw a wine on a first class American Airlines wine list, American Airlines would not pay more than $42 a case for that wine. And what that niche market is a place to dump good quality product that you need to move and get out of your inventory or get out of the system, and you're willing to sell it for pennies on the dollar. And you'll find Far Niente and French champagnes and these kind of wines. But anybody who works in this part of the business knows American Airlines would not pay more than $42 a bottle, whether it was Lafite or Dom Perignon or whatever it was.
But I guess the thing you do gain, although you don't get to, you lose money selling it, but you get the brand recognition, being served in first class. I mean, so that can help your brand. Exactly
right. So if you've then worked that into your marketing budget, if you're trying to build a niche business and you don't have that global brand, that has that kind of availability and that distribution, then it makes zero sense to sell through that. And there's so many wineries and there's so much product available that there's always somebody willing to say, hey, just take this off my hands. I've got 5,000, 50,000, whatever cases of this. I need to move it quick. Great. Well, here's how you do it, and here's where you send it, and it's gone. And you avoid having to put it out where you've reduced the price, where you disrupt, your pricing model, your average selling price. If you discount heavily, it's really, really hard reestablishing the price you're trying to sell to. So this is what the Master of Wine exam is all about. It's about understanding the logistics, how the system works, what that segment of the business is like. And there are people who pass the Master of Wine examination who've never worked in that part of the business and don't have that. But those are the kind of things that have a candidate stand out in the examination. So the number one thing to do, did anybody come up with a question yet?
I've got one.
All right.
So as an export manager for a medium-sized family-owned wine estate, what strategies would you employ in the USA, Europe, and China?
Awesome. So that's a medium-sized.
Medium-sized family-owned estate.
Okay, medium-sized family-owned. And does it say where that winery is?
No.
Ah.
And it does, because it says you're an export manager. What strategies would you employ to the USA, Europe, and China? So I'm assuming you wouldn't be in either of those three.
Don't necessarily assume that yet.
Well, you couldn't, I guess if you're in the USA, you wouldn't be exporting to the USA, right?
Yeah, but you could be the export manager for the US, for a US winery, and give an example, then exporting to. And what were the markets? US,
Europe, China.
And China. Okay, got it. And strategies. All right. So as you're preparing for your examination, who wants to venture forth into how they might answer this?
Sherry does.
Sherry.
Just kidding, Sherry.
Oh, you're so funny.
Bentley was our guest lecturer, so.
Yeah, well. No, I was just going to, maybe my first step would be like what needs to be defined in that question. I don't have it in front of me. I tried to jot it down. But the question, the word strategies jumps out at me. Like, what kind of strategies? Are we talking about marketing strategies, pricing strategies? What kind of strategies? That would be a starting point, is trying to define that better.
Okay.
Anyone else want to add to that? Michael?
Thank you, Sherry. I think you have to identify what medium-sized family-owned wine estate is, right? I mean, so you have family-owned wine estates like Gallo, or you have family-owned wine estates that are much smaller. So I think you probably have to identify what you're talking about, medium-sized. So yes, Sherry, you're going to have to look at strategies to be employed. And the first, and you're dead right in defining things. And the first thing crying out is, what the hell's a medium-sized family-owned winery? And this is where people just fall flat and start writing about something else. And it may have to do with families and medium sizes and whatever, but it's critical in a question like this.
Would you, you have a little bit of leeway, certainly. So one of the things I think, at least that we were being taught when we went to that little couple-day course is you can, as long as you don't get too narrow, you can set your own parameters. Because you could see how you could easily go down a rabbit hole with this and write volumes about this. So I guess setting your parameters of exactly what you're going to talk about, and probably using USA, Europe, and China, and trying to show the similarities and differences between those three within the parameters that you set.
So a really great point, and I'm going to go back to my brutal honesty. That's your direct access to the black hole. So really carefully look at, they're asking you to take on a persona, right? As the manager, is that how it said?
Yeah, export manager, yes.
As the export manager. So that's the first thing just to understand, that they're asking you to speak from a point of view. Does that make sense? So that helps you already in your paper. And you're the export manager for a medium-sized family-owned winery. Here's a key phrase that you sometimes may use in your paper, very often won't. For the purposes of this paper, I am defining a medium-sized family-owned winery as what? And that's the real key thing. This is going to establish the scope and the boundaries of your paper and what you're going to talk about. So if we were to think, okay, now I'm writing in a certain perspective as a persona, I'm the export manager. And for the purposes of this paper, I am going to define a medium-size family-owned winery as what?
I guess you'd have to take a look at production numbers, you know.
Right? That would be probably the basis to establish that. And so what constitutes today a medium size?
I mean, I'm really going to just guess out here, like, and maybe this is way too low, 50 to 100,000 cases.
That's what I would say too.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Here's the good news. You get to decide that.
Okay. So it's 50 to 100,000 cases.
Yeah. So as the export manager of a medium-sized family-owned winery, which I am defining as a winery that produces between 50 and 100,000 cases a year. It could be 50 and 200,000 cases. It could be 25 and 150. They're asking you to define this. And so many people start writing their paper and never ever define what that is, okay? And you're going to be setting up your whole paper in this introduction, all right? All right, so I am export manager of a mid-sized winery that, for the purposes of this paper, I am defining as what kind of production model? What is a winery?
Right.
Does it have vineyards? Does it not?
Well, since you're going to the bulk wine conference, why don't we say that it's more of a virtual winery?
So be real careful. They're asking you as a mid-sized family-owned winery. So in a virtual winery, in a bulk wine, in a strict bulk wine sense, is the owner of the business a winery owner or even a wine producer?
No, he's really a wholesaler.
Correct. So, and this is it. So again, and you've got to be able to speculate and brainstorm, and you've got to relax and really spend time with this question. People start answering the question way before they're ready. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What I would do, I would say, I'm defining a family-owned winery from an estate model where the family owns, manages, and controls the grapes, the vineyards and grape source. You may choose to go a different route and be successful. I'm just saying what I would do. that the family actually, if it's family owned, you own the production facilities and equipment, or the bank does and you pay them. And you can use humor, but be really, really careful about it. And that you take you do the processing from the grapes to finished case goods. Right? That sound like, so we're defining a family-owned winery is a winery with production between 50 and 100,000 cases that that processes and produces the wine from grapes to the finished case goods. And actually, and at this point, I might say, you know what, they don't have to own their vineyards. They could do contracts and whatever, but the winery, they receive everything from receiving the grape through production to the finished case goods. They do it in their facility. That would be a family-owned winery in my book. Does that sound plausible?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, is it arguable? And you got to learn to argue with yourself. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. Now here's something that may change the case numbers or whatever. You will see over and over, they say, whenever possible, provide specific examples. All right, has anybody seen that in the, or heard that?
Yeah.
All right. So here's what I'd like you to do, and this is why I stress going in the stores, looking at the bottles, and getting your mindset, and possibly doing case studies, because the way to answer this is to do 5 case studies. So give me 5 different family-owned wineries. It might be 3, it might be 7. Maybe we'll stop at 4.
Gallo.
Between 50 and 100,000 cases.
Oh, I thought it was
Medium size. So now what you do is you take the parameter. That's actually great, Michael. You take the parameters you set, and you try to provide specific examples of each.
Yeah. Frank family.
Can it be from obscure regions like Texas Hill Country, I suppose? If I use maybe just
yes.
one example.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like Becker Vineyards from the Texas Hill Country. Yeah.
Becker Vineyards.
You know, Tim, just as we're kind of going through this, I mean, I guess this is the challenge that I'm having preparing for the entrance exam, because you may get a question like this, and they're expecting you to write, you know, and I get the idea of defining key terms before, you know, I kind of get the whole idea. I feel like what's missing is sort of all the detail that once you're in the program, you start to study to be able to answer these questions. So, I mean, you know, as an entrance exam, I mean, can you shed some light on kind of what are they looking for as a candidate to be able to, you know?
The Institute of Masters of Wine is not an educational body per se.
Right.
And the study course is not to learn about wine.
Right.
It's to prepare for the examination, which you should be of suitable knowledge when you enter the examination, and that's why they make it so frickin' difficult.
Yeah.
And that's our challenge.
Yeah.
So now you're in this, and you even have four lifelines. And it's like, how the hell do you answer the question now? But tell me, did anybody know a good little Chianti producer?
Ruffino?
Yeah, how many cases does Ruffino make?
They make 125,000 cases a year.
Great. So I would define a medium-sized winery as 50 to 150,000 cases. So now you start altering your paper.
Okay.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, I can argue Bogle Vineyards is a small family-owned winery, and they're 1 million cases, and they're not big enough to compete with the big boys. So are they a large winery? Are they a Gallo? Are they a Trinchero, a Sutter Home? Are they these things? No. What about if you have a winery that's small, that's family owned, but it's distributed by or in partnership with a larger winery? That doesn't fit, but you got to think through these things. All right, so we got Becker Vineyards, we got Ruffino. Tell me of a cute little winery up and down Silverado Trail, Highway 29, something like that. Carneros, Walla Walla.
Mario Andretti Winery.
Andretti Winery. Awesome. Yeah. I can't, you can't see it from here, but right out in my garage is a Lotus signed by Mario Andretti. He's actually a friend of ours.
I had that nickname in high school.
Oh,
I was
did you?
a fast driver. I drove fast.
I
Yeah.
was going to say that probably. Okay, so great. So we got something from Texas. We got something from Italy. We got something from the Napa Valley. Give me another one. Who we got? Who we got in South America or Australia or
New Zealand, maybe?
New Zealand or whatever. A champagne, a French champagne.
Pierre Pater.
How do I spell that?
Pierre.
Like Pierre Peters.
ERS. Yeah, Peters.
Awesome. There you go. Is that family owned?
Yeah.
Is it small or medium size?
Yeah, medium size.
Yeah. So, and what you want is a diversity. Maybe you could pick a port producer. Don't forget sparkling wines and port and fortified wines in general and so on. People just think current trendy wines, and many times a question's going to say, for different wine style category styles, discuss pre-fermentation handling and treatment of the wines. And anybody who's going to pass this examination is going to say, okay, let's talk about sparkling wines. Let's talk about table wines, red and white. Let's pick some key varieties that would have difference. Let's talk about ice wine. Let's talk about this, because I know this shit. I've got mastery over this, all right? And you really have to be able to start to just bust it up. Now, for the entrance, you're not going to have to demonstrate this, but you are going to have to do what we're doing right now. Does that make sense? All right. All right. And it might be you say, you know what, God, when you're in the exam, you've got a time limit. Do you have a time limit for the entrance? Yeah. Okay. So you say, good. Maybe throw in something from France, from the Rhone, and name a top high-end Rhone producer, Beaucastel, let's say. Okay, Chateau de Beaucastel. Okay, great. Now, you look, what's the final part of the question there, they're asking for the strategies for US, Europe, and China?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So Beaucastel, what would their, as you're the export, so I'm the export manager now of Beaucastel. And I've got to look at, in Europe, what countries are even a possibility if I'm a French producer? Am I going to market my wines in Spain or in Italy? Or
No, U.S.
so part of your, no, in Europe, we're in Europe, but taking Châteauneuf-du-Pape to Italy would be business suicide. Nobody's going to want your wine in Spain unless it's tiny things. So as a strategy, my strategy for Europe would to be identify non-wine producing countries, especially with an affinity to France and French things. This would include UK, definitely, Germany for stronger red wines, Belgium, etc. As the manager, as the export manager for Beaucastel, my strategy would be to focus on our history, our international reputation, the story of our vineyards, about the region, and so forth, and especially focusing in restaurants where there's a tendency to have more continental cuisine and French restaurants and those kind of things, and then working with the stores and retail outlets that would offer a great international selection that of course as a proud export manager for Beaucastel, I would expect to see our wines placed and so forth. We would focus on the quality and the primary product, the Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Do they make a cheaper wine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Côte d'Or.
They make a Côte d'Or, and they make Cru de Coudelet. As export manager, we also can take advantage of our less expensive products so that we can build volumes, minimize our expenses, and have better understanding, because part of my strategy would be to find a broker or a distributor to represent us properly. So part of my strategy would be spending time in the market, interviewing the proper people to represent us, that we would have the confidence could market and sell the products.
I just want to point out, people often get strategies and tactics confused, where the tactics fall out of a strategy, where, with this question, I think you just have to be aware, not that it's tactical, but strategic. Like,
yeah, and this is really clear too, and spend time really dead on. Put a note in your to-do list of study things. How do I define a brand like that? What's the difference between a strategy and a tactic? And it can be explained as a strategy is how you're going to do something, and then the tactic is what you are going to do. So, and that's where it gets to the gray area, because it could be said that a strategy would be to put a specific emphasis on finding the right distributor and representatives, and working with the proper restaurants and stores that would have the clientele that would appreciate the Chateau de Beaucastel. Okay. The tactic would be setting up your your market visits, making the calls, and so on and so forth. So the strategy's more of the overriding how you're going to do it. And then if you were asked about tactics, it would be what specifically. You would set up your trips, you would have outreach, you would work to create a list of the distributors and brokers, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I just want to point out to these guys that in this example, in the examiner's report, they talk about, a lot of people would talk about the strategy for China was to put red on the bottle. But they were saying, that is an example of a tactic, not a strategy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, just as not.
Yeah, so the strategy would be to do the things that would convey to the Chinese the proper attributes, the proper elements of our wine in their language, in their context. Mm-hmm. And then you say, as an example of a tactic for that would be putting, so you could actually bring up a tactic, but you need to call it out separately. So you've got to, say, and here's the good news, when they're asking for strategy, they're not looking necessarily for lots and lots of little details. And people start to write lots and lots of little details that are tactics, not strategies, and they get pinged for that. So you've got to carefully look at that word strategy and know what it means. All right, so that would be, then we would have to do Beaucastel for China. And then we'd have to do Beaucastel for US. And the strategies are very, in effect, very similar. And I like your idea, Sherry, where you say, so what are the primary strategies that could be employed? So let's make a list of strategies. You said a couple of them earlier, Sherry.
I don't recall. I know I said pricing would be, you're going to have a pricing strategy. Certainly a...
How about the 4 Ps of marketing?
Oh, there we go. Yeah. 4 Ps.
So product.
Mm-hmm. Placement.
Place. Price. And promotion. There you go. So for Europe, we would look at the products. We would look at the Châteauneuf-du-Pape and the flagship Beaucastel wines. And our strategy for that would be careful placement and what restaurants, what shops that would have the clientele that would be able to appreciate and to pay for and to afford these kind of products. Another line of products is Cru de Coudelet and the Côte de Rhône, which can be more of an emphasis on more aggressive pricing. So that could be another strategy. And then that would give us different places. So we could get broader distribution, broader placement, maybe even chain stores and this, so forth. And then finally, the promotional strategy would be, and you outline something that you would think would be appropriate for a top-end Châteauneuf-du-Pape and whatever in Europe. Now here's what's really great. You now have an outline that just from this conversation that starts with, from my perspective as an export manager responsible for a medium-sized family winery, which I am defining as 50 to 150,000 cases of production, and with facilities and processing for the majority of these wines, from grapes to finished to finished case goods. In every market, I would specifically look at price, place, product, place, price, and promotion for each of these. And in this paper, I'm going to provide 4 case studies of different types of family-owned wineries in different regions from around the world and how they might approach this.
Tim, one concern would be when you go in, for the 4 case studies you're using and you're all going into China, it seems like it would probably be the same strategy. Would that be redundant?
Would Becker Vineyards go to China? If you were the export manager, where you say, we're taking Becker, Texas, Hill Country wines to.
Well, isn't that the question? That you have to look at it for each of the wineries going into Europe?
Is a strategy to not friggin' touch it with a stick and don't go there?
That could be right.
Yeah. Yeah. So don't think that there is a cookie cutter. And it could be that
Your strategy really could be that we're not touching it because.
Yeah, so another medium-sized family winery that I'm particularly familiar with is Becker Vineyards in where are they? Austin or
Fredericksburg, Stonewall.
Fredericksburg, Texas. This is a very interesting case study because it'll illustrate the strategic challenges of a small family winery from a lesser known region of the United States and trying to carve out a foothold in a niche in the market. Yeah. And if you look at the products, they are of excellent quality. They have won the awards, they have garnered the points. However, trying to promote a wine that's from a non-traditional, non-wine related region of a place like the United States, and this is true of areas of France and South America and Australia and anywhere else, can be a real challenge. And as the export director, I might look at markets like Canada and others, but when it comes to China, unless I can find a chain of barbecue joints that love country music, which is hot as a son of a bitch in China. It is. It's hot as a son of a bitch. And putting on cowboy hats and going and doing this shit. Somebody Google what's going on in China with country music. So again, you've got to think originally, and that's what they're asking for. You'd say, I would love, as a product manager for China, I would love to go there, and I would really love to find a toehold for us. The products we would want to focus on are going to be red. The place where they're going to be sold has to be where people are going for some sort of Texas or country experience. And the pricing of the wines is somewhat inconsequential because who's going to shop and, oh, I know where I can find a cheaper Fredericksburg, Texas Cabernet Sauvignon. That's not going to happen. And promotionally, our strategy is really going to be leveraging Americana in country and country music. And maybe we could find a music person to use promotionally or whatever. So, come up with a strategy.
Cool.
Yeah. Fun. Here's what I want you to burn this in your mind. All right. Yes, I'll be right with you, honey. I'm going to spend the next 2 hours looking at papers for the entrance examination for the Master of Wine program. blah, 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 tactic. God damn, didn't you even read the question? How the hell did you even get this far? Fail. Chinese love country music. They do. Brilliant. Not going to sell a lot, but they don't make a lot. And obviously this person wants to go there, spend the time. Well, these are real people grading these paper. They're reading these paper, looking for originality, looking for something that speaks out. Now, and it can be dead serious originality. It can be sometimes playful. You've got to be really careful with it. Yeah. Okay. And you've got to write a paper that stands out from the rest, that knows the difference between a strategy and a tactic, that knows how to define within some plausible range what a medium-sized winery is, and then that can pull up some good examples and write intelligibly about strategies of marketing, which are the 4 Ps. Well, by dingy. So you've got your intro. You're defining things. You're understanding what are strategies. You decide if you need to make a list, or if something pings in your head. Ooh, the 4 Ps. I can use that, right? All that's done. All right, we're going to pick these, and then you write as the export manager for each of these wineries, looking at the products, looking at the places. The point of purchase would be the place. Are there any wine clubs, online sales options in those countries, etc.? Are you going to offer low pricing? Are you going to offer just stable international, prestige pricing? And then what are you going to do to promote it? And with promoting, the Becker vineyards in China, you've got a strategy, and it's kind of fun and shows that, wow, this person understands basically marketing and a little bit about the market.
So Tim, I guess quick question. If you doing the Centrix exam and you don't have the details, I mean, even if you said, like, I'm going to sell the wine through a Chinese wine club, even though there may not be, but I mean, to show the thinking and to show that kind of, even if the information's not right, would you recommend that, or to just sort of not say, stay away from that?
Stay away from it.
Okay.
With a caveat. I'm not sure what's going on with wine clubs and wine club sales in China, but one of the great strategies, it would seem, who are the motivators, who are the connectors?
Okay.
And part of my strategy would be to learn more about online and internet and wine club sales in China.
Great.
That's part of a strategy, right?
Yeah.
And do that.
Yeah.
So if you come up with, pardon?
It shows the thinking, but it's not
exactly, and it's strategic thinking.
Yeah.
And they're asking about strategies. So
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. Most famous story that I know, and we'll kind of wrap up on this, is Kit Stevens, K-I-T Stevens, M-W. Have I told this story already? Okay. Legend has it that in one of back when it was only 4 papers and then the final paper, so in paper 4, there was a question dealing with the different types of bonds, and remember how I was talking about the airlines and the cruise ships and so forth. Basically, you send your wines out of bond from your bonded warehouse and with taxes not paid to the what do they call them? The pursers or whatever they are, the distributors who are facilitating the business to the cruise ships and whatever. And it's done with no taxes paid. So you're selling from one bonded warehouse or storage facility to another duty-free bonded warehouse. Does that make sense? So this was a question in the marketing paper, explicitly asking how the different types of bonds affect different products and positioning in the market. Kit Stevens wrote a paper about James Bond, not about taxes, not about warehouses, but from the creation of James Bond and in the books where he was drinking Bollinger, then the market changed. And as the Bond persona became Ian Fleming, the brand became Taittinger, which at the time was considered the luxury cuvee prestige. So then when Roger Moore, a different type of Bond, came about, it was Dom Perignon, et cetera, et cetera. And he wrote this apparently brilliant paper exactly answering the question that had nothing to do with warehousing and taxes, but on the market, on branding, and different bonds.
It's great.
Okay. So read the questions extremely carefully and breathe and take some time with it and read it again. You'll know when you're ready to start writing when you say, okay, in my intro, I need to define X. I need to explain X. Note to self, I need to carefully look at these words, strategy, this and that. And then what I'm going to do is I've defined this as that, so I'm going to provide some examples like we did. Now, you could make up 4 or 5 different wineries. They don't have to be specific if you're not comfortable with it. You could say, let's take an example of a medium-sized Napa Valley winery producing 60,000 cases a year, which, by the way, that could be Silver Oak, right? And this is, but is it family owned? That's where it would fall down. It no longer is. But again, you can write it about a fictitious winery, or you can use specific examples. And you would choose whichever you're most comfortable with. Or maybe a couple fictitious and say, one example I know of is Becker Vineyards in the Texas Hill Country. They've got a great product. They've got a great pride. Their pride is as big as the state of Texas. And that would basically be their strategy going into different markets in Europe or whatever. As far as the products, they would focus on what's relevant, to each of the markets, which might be different. So you could, and you can have a lot of fun with this. You write your 4 or 5 case studies. You draw a conclusion, and you're done. Think about that and how you would have dove into this prior to us having this discussion.
Yeah.
That's the key. Structure, structure, structure. All right. Any questions you have between now and when's the exam, the entrance? Next week?
Yeah, it's before the 31st, so
Have you taken it, Sherry?
I took a practical this weekend, so I still have theory.
Yeah.
How about you?
No, I haven't. Not yet.
How do you feel you did on the practical?
I felt like I was prepared for it. I had a technology issue, and my file just, even I had tested it, I had run the test, and I'm just like, it's your worst nightmare, and it actually happened to me. So I lost about 15 minutes through all of that. So I didn't do as well as I had hoped, but I was very prepared for it. It's just the time really ate into my time.
Well, the year I passed, I'd been taught this strategy and this deductive process and defining in the workshop the critical thinking with the electrical engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat down, and there's 2.5 hours for paper one, viticulture and vinification. The first question was compulsory, and it was about vine space. I think we did this, had a conversation. As a vineyard manager, how would a modern vineyard manager extract the best from a vineyard site, and discuss specifically addressing vine spacing, trellising, and canopy management. All right, this is a black hole of best. So best could be a sugar factory. We just want as many grapes of the shittiest quality, but at certain ripeness levels. And I need to get equipment in there. I need mechanical harvesters, damn the torpedoes. We're just pumping as many grapes out as we can. Or Petrus, you know, and then some midpoints. And I had 2.5 hours, and I finished my first paper, and I looked up, and I had used 1 hour and 15 minutes on my first paper. I do not remember a single thing till my final paper 5 days later. So, or 4 days later. There you go. Okie doke. Keep in touch. You've got 4 weeks to get all your work in. We'll keep up the discussion forum for about a month. Anybody who wants to personal message anybody in and exchange phone numbers and start a little separate study course, absolutely. And if the discussion forum keeps going after 4 weeks, I'll leave it open, but it usually just peters away, and but it's all up to you. And then on the calculators and the WineBizSim workbooks, you have access to those for a year. And there will be new ones showing up. We're doing a whole revision and populating. We're going to be posting a very, very detailed vineyard workbook. I was hoping to have it for you guys to look at, but it's a little too detailed. So we're trying to debug it and get it working properly. Okay? What else?
Tim, one last thing. I posted we talked about it, and I posted in the forum, you said, just to remind you, was the idea on expanding the next step to, if you wanted to continue to study more about some of the wine biz and things like that. I know there's some periodicals and things like that, but if you had any additional suggestions for what the next step would be.
I kind of rifle through winebusiness.com, Wine Industry Network, and Wine Business Insider, and I look at all the headlines just about every day. When I find something that seems very current, I'll read the article and think about it as a paper. And look how it's constructed. Are they, you know, how well did they present the case for what they're writing about in this technology or this marketing thing, or what's going on in China? And if you so keep a list of the areas that you really need to be focusing on, and it doesn't have to be a long time each day, but give yourself 30 minutes just to peruse articles. The problem with the books, the the latest wine business book that I know that was written was 2013. There's some marketing books. I'm having dinner tomorrow night with Liz Tosh, MW from Sonoma State University, and she put together this brilliant marketing book, but it's years and years old, so it doesn't even hit many of the current hot topics. If you need to learn wine sciences, enology, sign up for a course. And when you get a chance to be at a winery, ask questions that nobody's asking. Ask the business questions. And when you notice something that might be logistics oriented or business oriented, even in the barrel management and tracking, and wow, look at this. I was at this winery and they just unloaded a container of barrels, and they're all wrapped in plastic. They've got to be unwrapped, and they've got to be coated and scanned and entered into the system, and they've got to be washed, and they've got to be filled and whatever. Shit, how much? No wonder everybody wants chips. And you need to be able to pull those kind of experiences up when they're saying, discuss the positive and negative of oak barrels, different from various regions and sizes to this, and this. It really struck me how intently people have to be looking at alternatives to oak aging. I was recently at a facility where they were unloading the barrels. What a pain in the ass. What a logistics nightmare. What an incredible expense. And I talked to a couple really expert people. I've looked at some scientific papers. Sign up for the Journal of Wine Economists. That's one that most people don't know about. Some really wonderful people and really good friends. I just had to decline actually vetting a paper for the Journal of Wine Economists on a study done on consumers tasting wines under a blind tasting scenario, like for a technical, and enjoying wine at home. I was fascinated. My schedule just won't allow it. But speaking of that, I got to get my ass out of here and go get on the train. So let's keep that going, and everybody share what kind of resources you're coming up with, and what kind. There are some essential technical books, Sunshine into Wine by Richard Smart, and reading some of the classics, even Peynaud and whatever. Get Postmodern Winemaking by my pal Clark Smith, and he does webinars, and put yourself into these things, and just keep soaking it up. All righty.
And just throw it out. Anybody who's interested, I'm going to start studying anybody who's going to be, MW. Yeah. So message me. But
and if you can't write, take a writing course. If you don't know how to structure good essays, sign up for a day or an evening or a community college, how to structure good essays. And that's more valuable than learning soil types and strata of Burgundy, because that won't matter crap. But structuring an essay is imperative, okay? All right, you guys, well, cheers, have fun. You've been great. It's like my core team here on the last night. And
thanks, Tim.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Tim. Safe travels.
Absolutely. Be in touch soon. Thanks.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.